Happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday, July 27th, 2021, and welcome to another edition of Tuesday with Thom. So, are you watching the Olympics? It's on at least 3 different channels, so you almost can't help but watch it. But in my opinion, the Olympics in Serengeti are among the best things to watch on television these days. We'll do Serengeti later, but let's just talk a little bit about the Olympics. They're pretty exciting. I did see where Simone Biles has dropped out. I don't know the extent of that, but I'm pretty sure that's of major concern. 17-year-old Lydia Jacobi shocked the swimming world last night in the 100-meter breaststroke when she came in first place. The French basketball team beat the United States basketball team. Now, France's team did have quite a few NBA players on it, but there was a time not long ago when the United States would beat any foreign team by 40 points or so. So the world is catching up in basketball. Also watch snippets of swimming and table tennis and skateboarding and synchronized diving, which I'd never seen before. That synchronized diving is cool, man. You know, they go up together and then they do some kind of thing, and then they come back down together. I thought that was pretty cool. It was special. I also saw a film from 2016 called Race about the famous Olympian and 4-time gold medal winning athlete Jesse Owens. Good sports film. It's centered on the 1936 Olympics and Hitler's superior race theory. The Germans wanted to ban all Negroes and Jews from the games. The NAACP encouraged Jesse Owens not to participate. So Jesse was caught between the NAACP and Hitler. Jesse did participate. He shattered the superior race theory, winning 4 golds in the sprints and long jump, becoming recognized as perhaps the greatest and most famous athlete in track and field history. So here are some Olympic tidbits for you. 1960 Olympics. Cassius Clay traveled to 1960 Rome Games to compete in the light heavyweight division. Despite being only 18, he won all 4 of his fights easily. And in the final, he defeated 3-time European champion Zygmunt Petrikowski to win the gold medal. The 1968 Olympics will always be talked about. They will always be historic. They're known as the Games of the 19th Olympiad. They were held from the 12th to the 27th of October. They were the first Olympic Games to be staged in Latin America and the first to be staged in a Spanish-speaking country. It was also the first time the Games were held at such a high elevation, 7,350 feet. But the big news was in the medal award ceremony for the men's 200-meter race. Black American athletes Tommie Smith and John Carlos took a stand for civil rights by raising their black gloved fists and wearing black socks in lieu of shoes. The Australian Peter Norman, who had run second, wore an American human rights badge to support them on the podium. Of course, in response, the IOC banned Smith and Carlos from the Olympic Games for life, and Norman's omission from Australia's Olympic team in '72 was allegedly as punishment. However, San Jose State has erected, you talked about, I think last week we had Ainsley Carey on and we talked about statues and monuments. San Jose State has erected 2 statues on the campus of San Jose State honoring Tommie Smith and John Carlos. 1968, George Foreman won the gold medal in the heavyweight boxing division by defeating the Soviet Iona Sefoulis via a second-round TKO. After the victory, Foreman, in contrast to Smith and John Carlos, Foreman walked around the boxing ring with a small American flag, waving it as he bowed to the crowd. The high elevation of Mexico City, 7,350 feet above sea level, influenced many of the events, particularly in track and field. No other Summer Olympic Games before or since have been held at such a high elevation. Remember Bob Beamon? Bob Beamon leaped 29 feet, 2.39 inches in the long jump, an incredible 22-inch improvement over the previous world record. It stood as the world record for 23 years until broken by American Mike Powell in 1991. I'm laughing, I'm grinning because I'm thinking about the Fosbury flop. Dick Fosbury won the gold medal in the high jump using his unconventional Fosbury flop technique, which quickly became the dominant technique in the event. They introduced doping tests, where the introduction of doping tests resulted in the first disqualification because of doping. Swedish athlete Hans Gruner Ligenwall was disqualified for alcohol use. He drank several beers just prior to competing. So that's our opening monologue, a little tidbits from the Olympics. So let's move on. Our G-List guest today is sponsored by Mainstream Financial Group. Mainstream Financial helps to bring financial vision and clarity to your retirement plans. Today, Mainstream Financial brings you our G-List guest, Fry Gilliard. I think I got that right. Fry Gilliard is a artist in residence at the University of South Alabama, former Southern editor at the Charlotte Observer, and he's the author of more than 30 books. Whoo, man, that's some writing there. He explores themes of social justice, Southern music, religion, politics, and culture. His award-winning titles have ranged across the genres of history, memoir, journalism, and historical novels in young readers. We're looking forward to having him on this morning. Now, Tuesday with Thom, of course, is sponsored by our partners, the Best Girl Consulting Firm. Let's hear from Best Girl.
Best Girl is a consulting firm that provides customized leadership, access and inclusion, public relations, communications, and organizational consulting services. Clients include Fortune 500 companies, utilities, higher education institutions, small businesses, and associations. Best Girl's team of consultants, led by Joyce Gilly-Gossam, Emily Hedrick, and Sean Jones, partners with business and education clients to promote organizational effectiveness, communication, motivation, and leadership, with always an impact on the bottom line. Best Girl's customized consulting services include strategic planning, corporate communication, executive coaching, fundraising, and economic development.
Best Girl creates the solution that fits your needs. So let's get to our roundtable regulars and introduce Barbara Wallace-Edwards and Michael Walker. Barbara Wallace-Edwards, of course, is in Birmingham, Alabama. She is a Mobile, Alabama native, and I want to thank Barbara for helping us in signing up guests for Tuesdays with Thom. Barbara, how are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well, Thom. How are you this morning?
I'm doing
feeling
great.
good, but hungry. I started a new journey about 3 weeks ago. I started intermittent fasting, and it has been an very interesting journey. Those that know me know that I've been, for the last 15 years, been eating pretty healthy. I don't eat any sweets, no fried foods, no breads. I'm really particular about what I'm eating, but I was still feeling a little sluggish, so I started doing some research and came upon the title, the subject of intermittent fasting. So for those that don't know, it's where you go about 16 hours fasting, and then there's an 8-hour window where you can actually eat food. And so this is the first morning that I've actually been hungry. So I can't wait till after the show I can actually have some food today.
Then you're going to go eat a bag of jelly beans or something, huh?
No sweets, still no sweets. I'm still following my rules about eating certain things, but I'm looking forward to eating something about 10 o'clock this morning.
Okay, that's great.
Yes.
I guess.
It is. It really has been good. I can actually tell I've lost about 3 pounds in that 3-week period. 2.5-week period actually, and I can even feel a difference in how I feel. My energy level is higher, skin is clearer, so I think it really does make a big difference.
Good deal. Well, I want to talk about the Olympics, but let's get Michael on here, and then we'll come back to you. Okay. Michael Walker from Atlanta, Georgia. How are you this morning?
I am doing well, Thom. I hope you're doing well this morning, and you too, Barbara, with your fasting self.
Thank you.
So, Michael, what's happening in your world? You fasting too?
Absolutely.
But you
not.
always eat healthy.
Yeah, I do, and I eat about 4 to 6 times a day. So no
Yeah.
fasting here, you know. So I'm hungry like every 2.5, 3 hours. So I have to eat something. Yeah. So no fasting here. Couple things, Tom, I want to tell you, and our audience and Barbara as well. On Monday, President Biden has declared that people that have long COVID-19 could possibly qualify as a disability under the federal civil rights law. And what long COVID is when someone gets COVID and then their symptoms linger well past the time that they supposedly have recovered from COVID. Sometimes people have lingering lung issues or respiratory issues as a result. However, it is not going to be an automatic disability, but it will require an individualized assessment to determine if you are capable of being on disability because of that. And the one other thing is that maybe about probably 4 or 6 months ago, we talked about companies mandating employees to get vaccinated. Well, that is starting to come around now. And you're seeing it over in Europe and other places where they are using the passport. The other part is that you may see it reflected in your health insurance premium. There's some discussion now, can employees charge a higher premium to those people that are unvaccinated? Because one, most of this surge right now is coming from the unvaccinated. When they go into the hospital, the premium is a lot higher because they are sicker and it's more of a severe case of COVID. And as a result of this, the employer's group health insurance premium can skyrocket next year when they go back to renew. So there is some discussions about, can they go ahead and start to charge those people that did not get vaccinated a higher premium. Some people are saying it's probably better if the employers and the insurance companies would kind of, if you will, bribe the people, give them some type of incentive to go get the shots instead of raising the premiums. Either or, we're going to have to look at something like that. And you already see it in the NFL. They're going to penalize players that are not unvaccinated. And if somebody causes a team not to play, they forfeit the game and they can be fined, like, I think, $15,000 for every time they're not vaccinated.
Yeah.
Well, let's, I want to talk about the Olympics, but let's just talk about that for a minute. What do you think about that? You gave us the information. So, Michael, what's your opinion on it?
Well, I have to come down on the side of science on this. You know, I understand that this is a free country and it's America and you can decide what you want to do or not, but it's the same thing. And somebody made a somewhat of an analogy towards smoking. You remember back in the days where people would smoke and there was a big uproar about secondhand smoke and not, you know, causing other people to get cancer from secondhand smoke. I kind of liken it to that. You know, science have said, hey, you need to get vaccinated to avoid death and becoming severely ill. And then you have people saying we're not, but then they're causing this resurge. So I think there has to be some type of penalty of non-performance, some repercussions on that. So I agree with it. Sort
of like seat belts.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Barbara, your thoughts?
I agree with that assessment that Michael shared. You know, there are those who are saying they don't want to be treated by a medical professional who's unvaccinated. So I read just yesterday that the VA is going to require all of their medical personnel to become vaccinated. And I think there's pressure on other medical facilities to have that same requirement in place, because it's so unfair to people who are coming in for non-COVID related illnesses that are subjecting themselves to COVID because the medical professionals are not vaccinated. So I agree, there has to be something put in place that's going to sort of bribe the people or force them to become vaccinated, unless there's some type of medical reason for not receiving the vaccination. I understand that there's some people who have some illnesses. They're suggesting they don't take the vaccine right away. So otherwise, yeah, I think there should be some type of repercussions.
How much of this is driven by politics? people not wanting to be vaccinated?
Unfortunately, I think a lot of it.
Well, I agree with Barbara. There was initially most of it was driven by politics
Mm-hmm.
and the former occupant of the White House. However, a lot of people in his own party now has come out recently saying you need to get vaccinated. So
Right.
I think politics is going to drive it the other way now.
And the former president and his wife were vaccinated. So
True.
they're speaking against it, but they, they were vaccinated.
That's the thing. I think that if people, a lot of the commentators on television who are so adamant about against the vaccination, and then you find out that they've been vaccinated.
Right. And if they choose not to be vaccinated, then wear the mask. They don't want to do either or. And that's what has been the biggest issue. They're subjecting everyone else to their stupidity. And it's so unfair.
Yeah. Well, that's unfortunate. Anyway, okay. Well, Well, I agree with you guys 100%. I just, even now, I mean, if I go in the supermarket, I just wear my mask.
Absolutely.
Why not? And it doesn't hurt me to wear the mask.
Right.
It doesn't take anything away from me to wear the mask. It takes me less than a minute to put it on, less than a minute to take it off.
Just seconds, yeah. So
I get it.
Yeah, it has to be politics that's driving it.
I said to you, well, you take, we've all said I think we've said it on this show, the biggest trick in politics is to get people to vote or to choose against their own best interest.
Right.
And we see that more and more today, I think. Let's talk about the Olympics for a few minutes before we get our guest on. I'll throw it to you guys first about the Olympics.
I'll start. I haven't watched a lot of it, Tom. I tend to watch the highlights. It's sort of online, but I noticed that the U.S. is, I think, as this may have been of last night, has won 23 medals so far. With some Simone Biles out and Naomi Osaka out, who are two of the biggest stars. I don't know if I have that much incentive to watch those sports, in gymnastics and tennis, but I will probably continue to watch the highlights. And I watched the opening of the Olympics because I like to watch and see what everyone's wearing.
Okay. I'm glad you said that. See, if I had said that, people would have said, "Oh, you've been sexist."
No, I'm not sexist at all. It's just male and female. I want to see what the teams are wearing.
Okay. Michael?
Well, a couple observations. Number one, I think that I heard or saw that this time we had like 678 or 98 athletes that qualified for the Olympics, and there were 49 more women that qualified for the Olympics than men. So it's overwhelming and tilted towards women. And I have to compliment the U.S. women. They have been kicking butt and taking names, showing up and showing out. Unfortunately, in some of the cases, like for instance, Team USA basketball, we haven't been performing up to our level and the standard that's been set before us. I think that a lot of that, my personal opinion, is the way the team is constructed. Magic Johnson came out yesterday and said the problem with Team USA is they're missing a leader like LeBron James that would make everybody better, when I watched them play, it seems like they didn't have any organization. They didn't have a floor general. And my other observation is, I believe in old school basketball, you win inside out. We don't have a dominating big man that can protect the paint and can dominate inside. I think they are missing those two ingredients from that standpoint.
Just out of curiosity, who is the big man on the team? Who plays the inside game?
Bam Adebayo.
Okay.
And he's really a power forward. He's not a center. He's not a true center. Then they bring off Dale McGee off the bench, but Dale McGee doesn't really add anything from a scoring standpoint, And So
I think the game has changed so much until obviously they feel they didn't need it. But Yeah, I don't know. The little bit I saw the French playing better as a team,
Yes.
and I saw the Americans playing more individual.
Yeah, and the level of talent for the French team, of course, is a lot higher than it has been in the past. They have a lot of former NBA players.
Current
NBA players, right, on their team. So yeah, that makes a big difference too. The competition is better.
And they got back to Michael's point, the guy from Utah, the center.
Right.
What's his name? I can't think of his name. Rudy Gobert.
Gobert. And he's what, 7'1", 7'2"?
And he's dominant.
Yes.
I mean, you ain't going to the goal.
Right.
Without Rudy waiting on you down in there.
Right.
You know?
Right. And that's why you need a big to go to the goal and challenge him. That's what I'm saying. You know.
Yes.
And we don't have that. As a matter of fact, I saw one play where they had Kevin Durant guarding him under the basket. You know, they want to say that KD's 7 foot, but he's really 6'10", 210.
Right. Yeah, he's not that big.
Is 7'1", 260. So what is Kevin Durant's going to do that down there? You know.
Well, I don't. I think we it looks like we took all the stars, the young stars, and maybe we didn't build the team. We didn't build a team. We built a group of individuals, good players. But.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of the good players from the NBA too they opted out. They chose not to participate. So they may have chosen some better players in the beginning, but those players chose not to participate in the Olympics, and I really can't blame them. Again, it was a health risk. So those guys decided they were going to stay home.
Do you think they should have they postponed it a year?
Yes.
You think they should have looked at not having it?
I think they
for
should.
The next 4 years.
Yes.
I mean, you think about the athletes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you work all your life for those, those few moments that you have to be participating in the Olympics.
Right.
Is it fair? And I remember I think it was 1980 when we didn't go. President Carter decided not to go, and a lot of those athletes never got over that. You take lot away from them when you don't go. So, just your opinion.
You take a lot away from them, but at the same point, they're risking their lives. They might not survive COVID if they go and contract COVID. So, that to me, there's no.
Your life's worth a little more.
Absolutely, your life is worth more than a medal. The potential of winning a medal.
Well,
Michael,
I never thought that they would. Cancel the games because, we talked about it before on the show, how much money is involved in it. And they had reinsurance programs and what have you, and the money that's been invested in it. So I never thought that was going to be a possibility. It just, money is the main driver behind everything. It's just like, Texas and OU joining the SEC. It's all because of money.
Absolutely.
And people will say, Texas and Oklahoma are blue blood programs, which they are, and they don't need the money. They make plenty of money. However, it's been reported that if Texas and Oklahoma were to join the SEC, they may get more money, $25 to $30 million more.
More, that's true.
In addition to that, it's the recruiting. They're trying to protect that base because everybody wants to play in the SEC. It's the next step from the NFL. So they've got players that are leaving Texas, coming to Auburn, coming to Alabama, coming over here, and they want to say, hey, get us in the SEC so we can kind of keep up with that recruiting too. So I think it's those two drivers.
You got guys who previously went to Texas back in the day, who now will go to Texas Tech or Texas A&M, one of the other schools, in Texas, as opposed to going, because Texas hadn't been any good since Vince Young won it championship.
Right.
Yeah.
And Vince Young won that championship
by himself, single-handedly.
Mac Brown got credit as the coach, but Vince Young won the championship.
Yes.
Okay, well let's move on and get our G-List guest on here, and because I'm looking forward to that. The G-List, where everybody is a star, is sponsored by Mainstream Financial Group. Now, Mainstream Financial Group provides financial services for both individuals and businesses, and their mission is to understand the unique needs of each and every client and work closely with you, assembling a planning team to develop and manage your plan to help you accomplish your defined goals. Mainstream has financial professionals who will provide you with a complimentary, no obligation financial review. These financial professionals can then offer the custom advice you need to mend together the pieces of your financial life and come up with a plan that's truly comprehensive. So, Mainstream Financial assists retirees and near retirees in planning for a secure retirement so not to run out of money during their lifetime. So you can take advantage of opportunities with tailored advice and the resources to act on it. Mainstream Financial Group. Don't let your money run out before you do. www.mainstreamfg.com, 205-324-0589. And now, our G-list guest for today. Remember, Hollywood has the A-list, and here on Tuesdays with Thom, we have the G-list where everybody is a star. Fry Gilliard is a writer in residence at the University of South Alabama, former Southern editor at the Charlotte Observer. The man is author of more than 30 books. Among his most recent titles are A Hard Rain, America in the 1960s, Live as If a Teacher's Love Story, a memoir about his late wife, Nancy Gilliard, and The Slave Who Went to Congress, a children's book co-authored with educator Marty Rossner. And there's a 25th anniversary edition of Kyle at 200 miles an hour, telling the story of former NASCAR star Kyle Petty. Mr. Gilliard has won the Lillian Smith Book Award, the F. Scott Fitzgerald Museum Literary Prize, and the Alabama Governor's Award for the Arts. His work has appeared in such regional and national publications as The Bitter Southerner, the Oxford American, the Washington Post, Parade Magazine, and the Journal of American History. Let's welcome Mr. Gilliard. How are you, sir?
Okay, Thom, how are you?
I'm doing fine. I thank you. I was working hard on making sure I got that last name right. You know, when you grow up with the name Gossam, you want to make sure you get everybody else's name right, because nobody would ever get mine right.
Well, you know, I've lived with that for a long time now, and you know, gotten used to it. But thank you for getting it right.
Oh, good, thank you. So I want to talk about. I mean, I want to talk about some of your books, but just the different things. But let's talk about A Hard Rain, America in the 1960s. I want to start there because, and you said a decade of hope, possibility, and innocence lost. You say, one of your quotes is, there are many different ways to remember the 60s, and this book reflects yours. There was in these years the sense of a steady unfolding of time, as if history were on a forced march and the changes spread to every corner of our lives. As future generations debate the meaning of the decade, I hope to offer a sense of how it felt to have lived it. I lived it as well. And it was an incredible time. Just comment on it, please, and we'll go from there.
Sure. You know, for me, it was a coming of age decade, right? I started the decade, I was in junior high school, and when it was over, I was a college graduate just beginning a career as a writer, and I think I wanted to become a writer because of all the things that I had seen in that period of time. I mean, it was, you know, I was born in the Deep South. I was born in Mobile to a kind of privileged white family, nice people. I was taught not to be mean to anybody, but, you know, we were very much part of the status quo. And yet you could feel the change building around you, you know, and in 1963, and I tell this story in the book, I was on a high school field trip to Birmingham, and I walked out of the hotel in the morning, and there was Dr. King, Martin Luther King, being arrested and shoved up the sidewalk by these two Birmingham policemen who were not being brutal, but they were being disrespectful. They were handling him roughly, I thought, and they passed right by me. I mean, like within 3 feet of where I was standing. And I found myself looking into the face of this man I'd only seen on television, of Dr. King. And I don't know what I expected. I was 15, 16, something like that. But what I thought I saw in his face was just sadness, not fear, not anger, just sadness. And it just hit me. I couldn't explain it. I didn't have words for it. I felt like I was looking at history, looking at square in the face. And also, I just had this sense that you have as a kid that just something's bad wrong, you know?
Mm.
And so I found myself thinking about that issue, the issue of race, obviously a lot more than I had growing up thinking about, whatever, Alabama football or whatever,
Mm.
And so then I went off to college and got to Vanderbilt University, where I went the same year that the first African American undergraduates came to Vanderbilt. There had been
Mm.
Black graduate students. And so change was in there, and there was a lot of conversation. And you can imagine the first class of African American undergraduates at a school like Vanderbilt. These are great young people. They were brilliant. I remember the guy down the hall was making an A in calculus. This was a total mystery to me. I was taking calculus. I think I was praying for a D, so it was,
You just
it
wanted to
was,
pass.
I just wanted to pass. And here was this guy breezing through. And I thought, these folks might be pretty smart. So it was a great pivotal learning experience. And so, I lived through it. It sent me on a path of being a writer. And then sometime around, I don't know, 2013, 14, it seemed like maybe we were losing ground, like we had made progress that I thought was irreversible. And now we were litigating those issues again, voting rights, whatever it might be. The country was having a hard time adjusting, I thought, to having an African American president. And some parts of it were, and so I thought maybe there were lessons and warnings in that decade, and so that's why I wanted to write the book. Long answer, but
No,
that was my thinking.
it's a great answer. And growing up in the 60s, well, being born in the 50s and being a child, the 60s, the 50s, when you watched television and stuff like that, everything was hunky-dory. Everything
right.
was great. Now, it was the way it was, but the message that was sent to you was, well, this is the way it's supposed to be. And
Right.
then you get into the 60s and everything starts to change. And you said something that it was like a forced march, and the changes spread to every corner of our lives. And I agree with that. It was, what's interesting is for me, I was in elementary school in the late 50s, right around 60. That there was hope. There was hope that things were going to change. That things had been put in place to bring about change. Kennedy became president. Everybody was excited about that, so on and so forth. And so you had this. Things were going to that. In my neighborhood, all Black neighborhood, there was this feeling, man, things are going to get better, things are going to change. And at my age, it was, and we're the ones that are going to have to walk through the doors. And so it was very different. And then, President Kennedy was killed, Martin Luther King was killed, Robert Kennedy was killed, Malcolm X was killed. And it just, it was, hope was taken away.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a lot harder to hope. at that point. I mean, first President Kennedy was killed, but you still had Dr. King.
Mm-hmm.
If you were living in the northern part of the country, you still had Malcolm X.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while for people in the South maybe to understand Malcolm X, but he was he was not only a fierce presence. He was also beloved
Mm-hmm.
among the African American communities where he lived and worked. He had that way with people, and then he was killed. But then Robert Kennedy stepped forward, and here was a man from one of the wealthiest, most privileged families in the country who, uh, after his brother was killed, identified deeply with people who hurt, with
Mm-hmm.
people on the margins of American
Mm-hmm.
life, whether it was African Americans or Native Americans or Mexican American farm workers in California, or, white people in Appalachia who had lost their jobs, or whoever it was. He tried to be there. Um, and we don't know what kind of president he would have been for sure had he been elected in 68. But we do know what a loss it was when he was killed, and so soon after Dr. King was killed, which
Mm-hmm.
was
3 months,
also
wasn't it? 3 months, two
yes,
months, something to
yes,
that effect.
yes. And so, yeah, after that, it was a lot harder to hope, and yet there were changes, and yet you
Mm-hmm.
had, some New South governors that stepped forward at the end of the '60s. Jimmy Carter, Reuben Askew in Florida, Linwood Holton in Virginia, who was a Republican. All of them running on the issue of racial justice as being the cornerstone of what they talked about. So things did keep you. It was almost like two parallel tracks, two rivers flowing side by side, one of despair and loss and disillusionment, and the other of that hope that began that you talked about early in the decade. And both of them are still, I think, present in American life, and yet uh, it's still hard to say which is stronger. It is for me, anyway.
I'm going to get Michael and Barbara on, but I want to raise one more point with you. I think about when President Kennedy was killed. I think I was in the 6th grade,
Right.
and the I went to Catholic school, and the principal, the nun, came on the intercom system to tell us that the president had been shot and that we should pray for the president. And of course, we all did. And she came back on later and said that the president was dead. And at that point, school was out. I mean, we were,
Right.
everybody was crying, so on and so forth. And I want to compare that to the day. What do you think would happen? Do we have the same reaction today if something like that happened? There's so much division. That, to me, although there were some people who were, there were some people who thought, I'm glad he got killed, blah, blah, blah. But for the majority of the people, it was a sad, sad day, sad time in America.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think the division, there was division then, there's no doubt about that. But at the same time, now it's so structured, it's so structural. I mean, even how we get our information is divided. Some people
Yeah.
watch Fox News, some people watch something else, and it's like we don't even agree on the same set of facts. And it's 24 hours drummed into
Mhm.
our heads, and the political parties, are not as much about bringing people together, maybe as they used to be. You know, one of the things I write in the book is that one of the divisions by the end of the decade was what to do about division. Some politicians wanted to exploit it, and others
Mhm.
wanted to heal it. Well, we need healing really bad in this country, and I don't know I don't know how we do it. I mean, I think we have these conversations, and I think we try to listen, and I think we need to remember that even if we have strong opinions, we have to try to find a way talk to each other and listen to each other. It's something I try to teach at the university where I work, try to model it as best I can, but it gets harder, people yell back at you, you want to yell, and it's so it's a tough time, I think, right now.
Let's get Michael and Barbara on and give them an opportunity to talk to you. Barbara.
Good morning, Mr. Gilliard. How are you today?
Okay, Barbara, and please call me Fry.
Okay,
you can tell she's from Mobile because she pronounced your name correctly right off the bat.
she is, and us Mobile folks got to stick together.
Yes, we do, Fry. Thank you.
All right.
I want to ask a question about your time at Vanderbilt. I understand that you served as president of this group called Impact, and you hosted then presidential candidate Robert Kennedy and one of his friends, John Glenn, when they came to speak at the Impact Symposium. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience and maybe how it even impacted your life?
Oh my goodness, it had a huge impact on my life. Robert Kennedy was running for president at that point. It was March 1968. And John Glenn was traveling with him in support of him. Glenn was an ex-astronaut at that point, soon to become a U.S. senator in his own right, kind of moderate liberal Democrat. Glenn was, and I got to ride in the back seat of a car with John Glenn and Robert Kennedy, and here I was, 21 years old, and there were some Tennessee politicians. I won't name them in the front seat of the car. And one of them told Robert Kennedy, said, when you get over there to Vanderbilt, now this is the South, so don't be talking about race and poverty and all that stuff. People don't like that here in the South. And Kennedy looked over at me, had this little wry smile on his face, and he said, "Do you agree with what he just said?" And, I was 21. I didn't care what the guy in the front seat said. And I said, no, I don't agree with that. I said, it is the South. All the more reason why you need to talk about race and poverty. And I thought I would throw out a little bit of campaign advice, for the guy running for president. And so I said, and another thing, I said, I'm pretty sure the same media is covering you here is covering you other places. And if you change your tune, I'm also pretty sure they'll notice.
Right.
And Kennedy kind of smiled and looked back at the guy at the front seat and said, I agree with him, And,
I love it.
And so I can tell my grandchildren that I was a campaign advisor to Robert Kennedy.
So true.
But it was, it was special because, what I saw was a kind of humanity about him that reassured me about his public positions on things. He wasn't like his brothers, both of whom, Teddy and President Kennedy, were both very outgoing, hail fellow, well met kind of people. And Robert Kennedy seemed to me to be personally shy. He was confident. He knew what he wanted to say, but he was quiet, but he just seemed utterly himself. One of his sons had been a little boy, like 8 or 9 years old, had been sick, and somehow I knew that. And I asked about how he was doing, and he said, "Well, he's better, thank you. He's had a rough time, but we think he's getting better." And the conversation started to drift off to other things, and Kennedy stopped it and turned back to me and he said, "Thank you for asking that." And so there was just this kind of kind humanity, about him. I mean, I was arguably the least consequential person in the car, and yet he made it a point to make sure that I was included, and and so you encounter the humanity of people like that. Dr. King came to the campus for that program the year before I was the head of it, and just his his accessibility that many people who knew him much better have talked about. That sort of, there was a man I interviewed, a minister in Birmingham who had worked with King, and John Porter was his name,
Yes,
Sixth
Reverend Porter.
Avenue. Yeah, Reverend Porter.
Yes.
And Reverend Porter said Dr. King could undress you with his humility. And he meant he was, there was a kind of calm at the center of the storm about Dr. King that just could disarm people, and so being young and having the chance to encounter people who were great human beings on the stage of history, but to see their humanity, and even later when you learned about their flaws, and people all have flaws, but it doesn't detract from their greatness, which was rooted in their humanity, it seemed to me. So that was my very fortunate experience of that time at Vanderbilt.
Wow, that's great.
Michael?
Yes. Good morning, Fry. Glad you're
Good
here
morning,
with us.
Michael. Thank you.
My first question is, you were born December 23rd. Did you get cheated Christmas and on your birthday?
I do now, but when I was little, no, it was great. I got showered. It was like a 3-day Christmas. It started on the 23rd and continued on the 24th through the 25th. I
Oh man,
loved
that's
it,
great.
man. It was,
Yeah.
it was. I was indulged. I thought I was the, anyway, it was crazy, but no, now that I am older, people tend to economize a little, and that's
Okay.
fine.
I
That's
just thought
fine.
I'd bring a little levity to it. My real question is, you started your career in journalism, I would say, with race relations reporter. Tell me
That's
a little
correct.
bit about that news organization and what started it and what have you.
It was a Ford Foundation supported project that was in Nashville, and they were asked to write reports, and then later a little newsletter, and then a magazine, trying to give accurate information about race relations in the country. It started in the 60s. I got there, I guess, in 1970. And by then, we were also aware of other kind of ethnic awakenings, and American Indians or whatever, as well as the black-white issue. And so, as a young writer, had the opportunity to go out and report on stories that to me were about the most important issue in the country. I mean, it's America got off on a tough foot when it came to race. I mean, enslaved people, were part of our colonial history from the very beginning. And we've never quite figured out, I think, how to deal with all the repercussions of that. And then, there were people here before white Europeans came. And so that collision of cultures that became, deadly, particularly for the Native Americans, again, that the implications of that were still with us. So it was something I wanted to write about. I also knew even then that if you're writing about that from the point of view of being a white person, you have to really listen carefully, because in some ways the story you're writing is not your own, and you can't pretend that it is. But I think it's worth making that leap of moral imagination, as Richard Wright once said. Richard Wright once wrote this review in 1940 of a novel by Carson McCullers, a young white woman called The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And Carson McCullers, who was 23 years old when she wrote this novel, she was from Charlotte, North Carolina. One of her characters was an African American doctor. And Richard Wright thought it was the first time in American fiction that a white writer had ever gotten an African American character right, you
Mm.
know. And he wrote about this extraordinary leap of moral imagination that Carson McCullers had made in order to do this. And I think we have to try to do this in a country where, you know, we don't all have the same backgrounds. We have to listen to the point of trying to do that. But as a writer, you don't want to elbow somebody else out of the way, you know, who wants to tell their own story, right? So it's a delicate balance that you know, you try to achieve. But I had good mentors. The staff was racially integrated. There were two superb African American writers on a small staff, and a couple of really good white writers, and you know, and me coming along, the youngest of the group, and you know, just kind of learning at the feet of some people who were really talented and really committed to the work.
Yeah, I'd like to. I don't want to come back to the guys before we go, but let me just go back to something you said earlier. You talked about Vanderbilt, and you talked about Dr. King and Robert Kennedy being there, and so on and so forth. And at Auburn, even in the early '70s, we had speakers like Coretta Scott King and Louis Stokes and Ted Kennedy and so on and so forth. And you also mentioned the cultural things that were going on in your book. And we had, you know, we had the Temptations and the Rolling Stones and Elton John. And, you know,
Right.
there were all people from different walks, different areas. I mean, I wasn't an Elvis Presley fan, but, you know, I was a Temptation fan. So there was something for everybody, so on and so forth.
Right.
And that just doesn't happen anymore. Now you listen to the people who speak, quote, the language you speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where we've drifted.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
you know, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was
No,
just
go
agreeing
ahead.
with you. Yeah, but yeah, it's almost like even entertainment has splintered into you know, different discrete places, you know, and so you know, it used to be if you listened to a rock and roll station, you'd hear the Temptations or you'd hear the Four Tops or Otis Redding or whatever. You'd also hear Elvis or the Beatles or the Rolling Stones, and you know, it was all there together, you know, and you know, you can argue, make a case, and I think a pretty good one that you know, that rock and roll developed back in those days because you know, white and black musicians loved each other's music. You know, I mean, I write in the book about how Sam Cooke and Elvis Presley grew up not very far apart in Mississippi, and you know, Elvis loved black music. You know, his first song that you know, that he ever recorded was "That's All Right, Mama." You know, by you know, done by Arthur Big Boy Crudup, you know, originally, and Elvis loved that song. There was a guy I knew who went on package tours with Sam Cooke and the Everly Brothers on the same bus, and
Wow.
he said you'd see Sam Cooke in the back of the bus with the sitting with the Everly Brothers, these two white guys from Kentucky, and Sam Cooke would have the Everly Brothers guitar, and Sam Cooke would be singing Hank Williams songs. You know, well, you know, music was something that brought people together. You know, and I'm not sure it does that now, and you know, I'm sad about that. You know, I loved you know, you know, I remember being the only white kid at a James Brown concert in Mobile one time, or one of about two or three of us, you know, and it was, you know, I felt totally welcome there, and you know, I'd listen to him on the radio too. I thought he was the hardest working man in show business. You know, I was
The
I was glad.
Godfather.
The
Yes,
Godfather.
yes. So anyway, I thought it, you know, I thought it brought us together. And you know, that tell one other quick story. I don't mean to get
Go
long-winded
ahead.
here,
We're good.
but in you know, in Alabama and Muscle Shoals, you had you had these wonderful soul singers, Wilson Pickett, Percy Sledge, people like that, Arthur Alexander, uh, making these great records there. Well, the bands that backed them were white. You know,
Mhm.
the studio musicians were white guys who loved that music. And Percy Sledge, if you go to the Alabama Music Hall of Fame up there in Tuscumbia, there's this great quote from Percy Sledge who said, "We were as one. We were like brothers. You know, they were there making music. It was this little oasis in the mid '60s where they knew that there were troubles out there in the world, and you know, music was what brought them together. You know, I love stories like that."
That's great. Let's we got a little more time. Let me go back to the group here. Michael, you start back. What, you got another question?
Yes, I'd like to ask Fry about the meeting with Stokely Carmichael and Eldridge Cleaver. What was the difference between the two gentlemen? And I know you said they were coming to speak.
You
Yeah,
may want to update Stokely Carmichael and Eldridge for some of the people, some of our
sure,
guests.
sure. So this was 1967. Stokely Carmichael was then the head of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And Stokely had become the most prominent spokesperson for Black Power in the country. I mean, he was one of the people who had popularized that as a slogan. And he came to Vanderbilt to talk about what that was, and how it was more than a slogan, how there was something that he referred to as institutional racism, systemic racism. Well, I had never heard that term before in 1967. And he made this brilliant, he was a young guy then, 25 maybe, made this brilliant presentation of what systemic racism was. And, you know, a lot of us who heard it never forgot it. I mean, it was like really important for us to hear that. On the other hand, Stokely was and his folks were pretty suspicious of even those of us who invited him to come to campus. And so we had a meeting before the speech where a couple of his guys from SNCC, and one of them who was traveling with him was Eldridge Cleaver, who became one of the leading figures in the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense in California. Cleaver had written a book called Soul on
So, all
Ice,
right.
and it was a pretty hard-hitting memoir about his life growing up as a black man in America. And so we were, and so I was telling this group um, of folks, I was kind of meeting with them in advance to make sure we were all on the same page. And I was telling them that we had had some death threats toward Stokely and toward us, frankly, for bringing him. And I said we didn't necessarily take them too seriously, but we were taking precautions, and we had police protection that would be, you know, on the lookout. And they said, "Oh, now wait a minute." They said police protection to us is a contradiction in terms, right?
Mm.
And they said we think of police as the occupying army. Well, you know, I was this, you know, white guy, and I is sitting there thinking, oh, there's a big gulf of perception here, you know, because we'd been working, as it happened, with an African American police lieutenant to set all this up, who I knew was a good guy and I trusted him. But I thought, man, this could come all unraveled here, you know, because we don't want something to happen to Stokely Carmichael on this campus. We've made arrangements for the protection, but if they don't trust it, this is not going to be good. So I tried to explain all this. Well, Eldridge Cleaver was still very skeptical. And he looked at me with the hardest eyes I had ever until that moment looked into in my whole life. And he said, I don't like it. And so I didn't know what to do except to look back at him and say, you know, I understand that, but right now it just seems like we have to trust each other. And we just kind of looked at each other, and then he finally looked away. And so we were it was set. We would go forward with things on the way it was arranged. And so as we were walking over to the auditorium, Eldridge walked up to me and he said, you really meant that about trust, didn't you? And I said, I did. And 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 it was interesting because then we were just two guys talking to each other, you know. And what I took away from that was that it doesn't always work, but the power of goodwill is a very important first step in people being able to reach across these barriers. You know, there's a pretty big barrier between him and me, but to his credit, you know, he was willing to reach across it too, you know. And so I don't know. Maybe it sounds naive to put it that way, but I just took something away from that about how people, you know, if you're not hostile and you're not afraid and you're listening, that just can go a long way. And you know, it's hard to remember that sometimes, you know.
I agree. Listening is the big key, I think, to what you just said, because many times you say 3 or 4 words and the person jumps in and starts going down another path. And
Yeah.
who was that? Who asked that? Was that Bark or Bar? Who's up? Barbara, you up?
It's Michael.
Who's that? Michael.
That was Michael.
Okay.
Yes, I could go on talking to you forever. I mean, you have so many interesting things to talk about. I don't know if I should ask another question at this point, Thom, but I just want to say, if we don't have time, I have thoroughly enjoyed having you as our guest today. Gosh, this has been absolutely phenomenal. You've written over 30 books or authored or co-authored over 30 books, and I can't even imagine what's next for you. So.
Well, you know, I appreciate being on here. The next book that's coming out, I do have a 25th anniversary edition of a book about a NASCAR driver that's just come out, who's a really interesting guy and not your stereotype of a NASCAR driver. One of the smartest people, Kyle Petty, is that I've ever met, and really decent human being in a whole lot of ways. But the next major book will be next year, and I had a chance. Cynthia Tucker is an African American Pulitzer Prize winning columnist, and she's the journalist in residence here at South Alabama. And she and I have written a book that'll be out next year called "The Southernization of America: A Story of Democracy and the Balance." So it's kind of a reflection on our own time, looking at the sort of twin exports from the South when it comes to politics and kind of the mood of the country. And one of them obviously is pretty bad. I mean, that sort of, the South is the epicenter of racism in the country. I mean, slavery was embedded most deeply here. And so one of the unfortunate gifts to the rest of the country has been the legacy of that. But the other gift to the country also coming out of the South, we argue, was the civil rights movement, and that sort of legacy of people crossing barriers in the South. And we saw it again in Georgia in this last election with, you know, you had a black man and a Jewish man campaigning together, each running for the U.S. Senate. You know, you had all the work that Stacey Abrams did to make the ballot available to as many people as possible. So that's the other possibility, is the South and the country become more like each other. So we reflect on all of that. And Cynthia is a wonderful person to work with. So I'm real excited about that book.
We all know Cynthia. Matter of fact, we had classes together. And,
okay, great. Yeah, well then you know.
We took some journalism classes together. Oh yeah, she's great. She's great. You tell her I said hello. And
I will, Thom. Thank you.
So thank you so much, man. It's been wonderful. As you get these other books out, we'd love to have you back and just continue the conversation. The conversation has been great.
I'll bring Cynthia with me next time. How about that?
All right. Matter of fact, that would be great. That would be great.
Okay, good. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, man. Okay, that was wonderful. We get into some pretty deep topics around here. Let me congratulate all the athletes who are participating in the 2020 Summer Olympics, branded as Tokyo 2020. It's a once in a lifetime thing to be part of the Olympics, regardless of where you are and what you do and so on and so forth. So we offer our congratulations to all of them, and we appreciate Fry being on with us today. It was very, very educational, and I look forward to hearing more from him. And so that's how I see it on this Tuesday, July 27th, 2021. That's our show for today. I want to thank the audience. We appreciate you. I want to thank Michael and Barbara. Thank our G-list guest, Fry Gilliard. I want to announce our upcoming G-list guests on Tuesdays with Thom are Chandra Scott, Executive Director of Alabama Possible, a statewide nonprofit organization that breaks down barriers to prosperity through advocacy, education, and collaboration. Frank Brucato is going to be with us. Frank's my old high school quarterback. We're going to have fun. Now he's the mayor of Hoover, Alabama. Dr. Tamala Maddox, the founding middle principal of I3 Academy. That's our next three guests. So we just want to remind all of you that we will celebrate our 1-year anniversary on September the 7th. That's right. We've been doing this for a year now. I want to thank our sponsors, Best Girl Inc., Mainstream Financial Group. You know somebody who you would think make a great guest on TWT, please refer them to us at either Thom at Best Girl or Emily at Best Girl. I want to thank Emily Hedrick, the communicator, our producer. Thanks Sean Jones, the organizer. Remember to enjoy yourself. Make every day count. Peace.